Good morning on this Sunday, December 20th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. New poll numbers in Georgia's Senate runoff show the races are tight. We'll take a look also at the early vote totals and get insights from the gang. And the long-awaited COVID vaccine has arrived in Georgia, and it couldn't come soon enough. Aaron, Phil, Janelle, and Kathy are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Republicans and Democrats in Georgia's Senate runoffs are calling on the big names to get their supporters to the polls. This week, we saw Vice President Mike Pence again, and also President-elect Joe Biden.
It's time to stand up, take back our democracy. Send me these two men, and we will control the Senate, and we will change the lives of people in Georgia.
Fresh from an electoral college vote that gave him the official votes he needed for the presidency, former Vice President Joe Biden made his way to Atlanta to stump for Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff.
You got the young Jewish son of an immigrant, mentored by John Lewis, running alongside a black preacher who holds Dr. King's pulpit at Ebenezer Baptist Church.
On Thursday, the current vice president was back in Georgia to pump up Republicans, urging them to vote for the incumbents, Senator Sen LeFlore and David Perdue.
We're fighting for free and fair elections, and together, we're fighting to hold the line in the United States Senate.
Let's take a look at the latest poll numbers from Insider Advantage. You can see Senator David Perdue has a very slight edge over Jon Ossoff. Only 3% of voters say they're undecided. Also, Senator LeFlore with a slight lead over Raphael Warnock. Both races 49 to 48, but the margin of error is 4%. Theron, we'll start with you. What do you make of the numbers and the president-elect's message to supporters?
Well, I thought the president-elect was very specific about his message, and that is encouraging everyone who voted for him to go out and vote for Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff. Also, Lori, you heard a very sort of compelling message from the president-elect. Of course, he was talking about issues that fire up our base, like affordable health care, access to quality education, and of course, dealing with this deadly pandemic. But in order for us to win, we've got to make sure that we do well with moderates and a lot of disaffected Republicans as well. And then as far as the numbers, it's very, very encouraging what we're seeing for Democrats. But unlike past runoffs, I think the turnout is going to be higher than people expect.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing already. And Phil, you know, we've said all along that these would be really close races, but they also have to be tough to poll because we just don't know about turnout.
Well, you're making a good point. Matt Towery, of course, the former Fox 5 political analyst who's been polling for 20 years, he's going to poll again, by the way, probably a little later in December. But it is tough. I think I do agree with some of the Theron's points that, especially with regard to independents and moderates, you said you got 3% there undecided. It's all a turnout election. I think all of us on the panel agree with that. The good news for Republicans is you don't have some pesky libertarian draining away, thousands of votes from the Republican. In fact, David Perdue wouldn't even be in the runoff if it hadn't been for, I think, a libertarian that drained away some votes. And but I did have to laugh when I saw your video with Joe Biden claiming he wants to reclaim a democracy. He's wrong. This is not a democracy. Any student of government knows it's a constitutional republic. And a democracy is really mob rule when you come right down to it. The majority rules, and to heck with a minority. So I wish Democrats would get that straight.
Kathy, this week as a Democratic elector, you cast your ballot for Joe Biden. But also this week, Senator LeFlore early voted in the runoff, and afterwards she would not say to the media whether she would formally challenge the presidential election outcome when Congress meets to formally ratify the Electoral College. What did you think of that?
Well, it's been a pattern with both of these Senate candidates to not answer critical questions that the people that they represent would like to know. On that question, both people who are Democrats or Republicans or people who are independent, deserve an answer to that question, because it's very important to know if our senator is going to honor the will of the people in this state and across the country, or if she's going to play politics right to the very end. And I think people should hold any elected official accountable for providing answers, for debating, for basically being responsive
Janelle,
to what they want to know.
And Janelle, if Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell could congratulate and recognize Joe Biden as the winner of the presidential race, doesn't that give Senators Perdue and LeFlore some cover to do the same?
Well, I mean, the question wasn't, whether they recognize Joe Biden. The question was about, her supporting the will of the people, whether or not she's going to vote in that direction. But let's just be clear. And first of all, I think it's kind of funny to hear Democrats talk about not answering critical questions when we still don't know if they're going to pack the court or not. But to be clear, the vote is going to come after the runoff. So asking her what she's going to do is kind of pointless. What you need to be asking is, how can I help? How can I help you win this election? Because that's what's going to matter. Because without Republicans in the Senate, we already know what the answer is going to be. So everybody should really be focusing on just winning this race. Senator LeFlore has supported the president all the way through, and she will continue to support the president. But at this point, the only thing we need to talk about is how can you help her in this race so that she can win come January 5th.
Phil, one of the messages that Republicans are driving is radical liberals will have control of the Senate if Warnock and Ossoff win these runoffs. But there's been a lot of gridlock in Washington, and Georgians we know are hurting, many of them because of the pandemic. It looks like we're getting close to another stimulus deal. But, what about voters who say, well, maybe this is a chance to get rid of the gridlock if Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the White House?
Well, Lori, I think political scientists will tell you in modern political history that a lot of Americans just like divided government. Now, it does make it tricky to govern often with major policy issues, but in the past, there's been room for compromise, negotiation between both parties on Capitol Hill. Now, you could argue, and probably rightly so, that that is changing a lot. Although I do think that there are voices in both parties that still want to have a break on, say, having the Senate stay Republican is kind of a break on radical things. So I think that there's still a good shot for independents to realize that, wait a minute, we don't want one-party rule where everything can be rammed through. Janelle mentioned court packing. That would be terrible. Also, the radical Democrats want to bring in Puerto Rico as a state and make the District of Columbia a state. Obviously, that's totally radical. It's never been done, obviously, proposed. So I think that the Senate I'm going to make a prediction. I think the Senate should remain in Republican control.
So Theron, similar question to you. So how do Warnock and Ossoff overcome that message that, there will be no system of checks and balances if Democrats wind up controlling everything? I mean, voters, I think, especially in Georgia, may not be comfortable handing over all the keys.
Well, I think what voters really support in Georgia, Lori, is for people in Washington to get things done. Most voters have a low approval rating for Congress as a whole. You've seen those poll numbers. But I think ultimately, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, you want things to work for all Americans in Washington. And more importantly, while we all strive for bipartisanship, but we live in a very tribal era in this country. And so having Democrats control the executive branch and the legislative branch may not be a bad thing for our country as a whole. I think we just got to put politics, put people in front of politics, and more importantly, put their interests first rather than political wins.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Coming up, if early voting is any indication, Georgians have received the message of the importance of these runoffs. We'll break down the early voting numbers straight ahead.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Early vote totals show about 1 million Georgians have already early voted. A closer look by GeorgiaVotes.com shows absentee ballots are down almost 30%. In-person voting is up about 20%. Kathy, I love getting into the weeds here. It's early, but I would think Democrats don't like those numbers since Joe Biden won about 2-1 with absentee ballots in the general election.
Well, that's true. But, absentee ballots have just been hitting people's mailboxes in the last week. So we're going to see a flood of absentee ballots coming in, probably during the dead of the last week of this month. So that's one thing to think about. And as we look at who requested absentee ballots, we know that Democrats have an advantage there. So it's really just getting them to get them back. The other piece is early voting isn't the only sign of who's out there, right? You got to kind of break it down. And what we're seeing are good, strong numbers from Democrats across the board. I think people are just feeling a little more confident about going to the polls in certain places. So I feel good about it, but I would certainly encourage every Democrat out there that wants to vote to go in and get it in, because we want to make sure that, our famous ice storms and other weird weather don't happen on January 5th and make it hard.
Yes, you're right. And Janelle, to Kathy's point, another number that we're watching closely is African-American turnout. It's hovering around 32-33%. So doesn't that give Democrats reason to be optimistic here?
Well, I think the last race showed us that diversity doesn't necessarily mean Democrat, and that just because they're a high number or turnout of minority voters doesn't mean they're voting Democrat. I don't vote Democrat. So I don't know what that's going to show. I know the president picked up more minority voters than any other president going forward in this last race. So, you never really know. But I will say that this is showing us that something suspicious happened, I believe, last time. And for Kathy to say, well, the ballots are just hitting the mailboxes at this point in time, I mean, that means they must have came early in November, because around the same time, early voting, we saw a higher influx of votes coming in through absentee. So it's either that or another reason why we don't need those ridiculous drop boxes anymore, and people are just ready to go and vote in person.
So new numbers out from the Secretary of State's office show Georgia registered 76,000 new voters since the general election. More than half of them are young voters. Theron, what do you read into that? And what about Janelle's comments about these ballot boxes?
You want me to answer or Phil?
Did you?
But I can answer.
You want me to comment first?
Sorry, Theron first.
It's okay. I'll be quick, Phil. Yeah, so, one of the things that has not been talked about a lot, Lori, is that young people in the state of Georgia really played a key part in Joe Biden becoming the president-elect. And we saw a significant gain between, as you mentioned, 18 to 29 voters. And so this movement that we saw, a lot of unrest in the country, is now translating to the voting box. And so I think ultimately that's a good win for Democrats, because we know that younger voters tend to vote more Democratic than they do Republican.
Well, Phil, you can automatically register to vote when you get your driver's license, and 76,000 new voters, that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll cast ballots.
Well, that's right, and it kind of cuts both ways. The other side of the coin from Theron is that you've got people coming in from other states that are fleeing high-tax states that are basically under lockdown, and they want to move to Georgia, and it's a good place, of course, to do business. Secondly, yes, sometimes younger voters do tend to skew Democrat in some states. I don't know if that'll happen again in Georgia, but I do know that some of the new citizens are legal immigrants from other countries like Venezuela, perhaps, or Cuba, and they have lived under communism and don't like tyranny. They certainly don't like Reverend Warnock's crypto-Marxist sermons, which are all over the airwaves now. So I think it's a wash.
Janelle, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger called for a statewide audit of signatures in the general election. He says he's doing it to restore confidence for people who may be doubting the system because they didn't like the results.
Yeah, so I'm not understanding why we keep going back and forth with this. It just shows that, this is something that could have happened the first time and not on the fourth audit. So if at one point, Gabriel Sterling said that we couldn't go back and do signature matches, and now we're showing that we can do signature matches. This is if you want to restore integrity in elections, be consistent. Start with this from the beginning, not from the end or behind the eight ball, now saying that we can do it when we couldn't do it before. That's what voters need, and that's what I think would help more so than going back and forth. I'm glad to see it happening at some point, but I really wish it had happened at the first audit.
Kathy, if Democrats lose in the Senate runoffs, are Republicans making it easier for them to claim fraud when this is all said and done?
Well, I don't know, but I just want to address something that Janelle just said, because the issue of the signature match is this. The signatures get separated from the actual ballot. So even if you were to decide that you've discovered some cache of bad signatures and whatever, you can't match them back up to the votes that got cast. So it's a wash in terms of the outcome of the election, which is why, Gabe Sterling and others said that it doesn't matter because it won't change the outcome of the election, but it will cause harried election workers to have to spend a lot of money and do a lot of work for this little sideshow.
But Phil, couldn't
and whether Democrats... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to go back to Phil because we don't have a lot of time. Couldn't the courts, though, step in if they do find a lot of these signatures don't match?
Yes, the courts could step in, and let's take the case of State Senator Greg Dolezal, who actually purposely did an illegible signature when he was doing his absentee ballot. And what happened? He ran it through the system. The system claimed that it was verified. This shows that these all-mail absentee ballots are fraught with fraud, and I don't care what the AJC newspaper says or what Democrats say. And Raffensperger should never have agreed last March to settle with the Democrats to have this flooding of the absentee ballot applications all over the state.
Theron, final word on this, about 20 seconds.
Listen, I think we gotta, I hear both sides. To Janelle's point, we should have did this early on. I think Kathy made some really good points, as always, of really making sure she takes the viewers deep into the weeds as far as what's going on. And then, Phil, wants to take it to the courts because clearly, they may have a shot there. But ultimately, the Secretary of State's got to continue to be transparent and make sure that he hears everyone with this next audit, because he's not going to make everyone happy with the outcome, but he's got to remain transparent.
Good points, everyone. Thank you. Coming up, the coronavirus vaccines make their way to Georgia. We'll discuss straight ahead.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The long-awaited coronavirus vaccines arrived in Georgia this week. But Kathy, I want to ask you, Governor Kemp stressed we can't let our guard down, especially as we see rising cases and the holidays are upon us.
Well, yeah, I mean, we are definitely seeing the impact of Thanksgiving and people getting together, and I know everybody wants to, and the end of the year holidays are even more exciting for people to get together. But we're starting at such a higher level of an infection rate than we've had even in the past that January is just going to be terrible. And so I just would encourage people to be, enormously careful, kind of draw it in a little bit. Don't be as expansive as you might normally be during the holiday season, and let's just keep working at this. We got to keep chipping at it till we come out of the other side.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I want to switch gears here. This week, a little bit of a local issue here. This week we learned that Lenox Square is putting in metal detectors after several shootings at the high-profile mall. Phil, we also learned that Mayor Bottoms is forming another committee to look at so-called nuisance properties which can harbor crime.
Well, it's funny that Mayor Bottoms of Atlanta is just getting around to that now. We still have a huge problem from what she let happen last summer when we had all of the spike in crime. You had rioting and looting, property damaged. The 8-year-old little girl, Sequoia Turner, was shot and killed by armed thugs who blocked the street. And to this day, the mayor is not saying, look, whenever a police officer is involved in a shooting incident, we will honor due process, whether the officer is right or wrong. If that could be done, I think that would help get our spiraling crime down a little bit. And I think I would agree with a lot of people, regardless of politics in Atlanta, they want a new police chief, and maybe a tougher police chief than the one we have.
Theron?
Oh, wow. Where do I start? Let's start with the police chief. I'll go backwards. So I think Rodney Bryan is doing a fantastic job. I mean, he's in an interim basis, and I think he should be strongly considered to be our permanent chief. He is tough on crime. He's actually tougher than a lot of, former chiefs that we've had. I think if you talk to folks within the police department, they feel that Rodney Bryan is one of them. And so I think, while recruitment is up, they're going to continue to make sure they deal with the culture within APD. But to go back to the nuisance committee, Lori, one of the things that the mayor pointed out is that a lot of the crimes that we're seeing, not in, Lenox Mall, so I'll go ahead and take that off the table because I know you would probably push me on that. But if you look at some of the crimes that are happening in some of the neighborhoods around the city of Atlanta, many of them, not all, are happening around some of these nuisance properties. And so, listen, dealing with this crime problem in Atlanta she's got to take a holistic approach. And you can't just solve everything at once. You got to continue to make sure that you're addressing each area that prevents this, that produces this crime problem. But ultimately, I think this was a good decision by the mayor. And again, I told you this, she's focusing on this. This is her #1 priority.
We know some Atlanta city leaders are also looking into the possibility of a guaranteed income pilot program in the Old Fourth Ward. Former Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang, who ran on the issue, was in town to talk about it. Kathy, as the former president of the Atlanta City Council and candidate for mayor, I want to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I think it's a great idea. And, we can only think just a little bit about the income relief that we saw earlier in the pandemic and how it helped, both, kind of buoy the economy along, but also gave stability to people who really needed it. And we'll see that again if we manage to get any relief out of the Congress. Universal income allows people at the lowest economic level in our economy to be able to have some stability to predict how their lives are going to go. And we've seen it here. And having been somebody who worked at CARE, the International Development Organization, people who are incredibly poor know how to manage their money. They just need money to manage. And I think it's going to be a great experiment, and I look forward to seeing the results.
Janelle, your take on this guaranteed income issue?
You know what creates stability for low-income people? A job. Consistent income that they have earned. I don't know what more we need to be convinced that Democrats are walking us down this socialism street and trying to do it slowly without us seeing it. But the truth of the matter is policies like this is where the problem lies. There's a dignity that comes in earning money. There's a dignity that comes in working for your money every single day and making sure that you have what you need. So giving someone extra $1,000 a month, which is probably not going to cover all of their bills anyway, it's not going to help eradicate poverty. It's opportunity, providing jobs. I don't know how many ways to say that.
Theron, do you want to respond to Janelle?
No, I thought Kathy and Janelle did a good job explaining the issue. You heard both sides.
Phil?
Well, I think Janelle made some great points. Again, handouts, freebies that the Democrats love to dangle before the mass of voters. But I do think that, especially with lockdowns and the restaurant industry and other industries hurting, people want jobs. And I think that's the key, is more jobs. That's why the Republicans have an edge, I think, in this runoff election.
All right, everyone, thank you. Well, coming up, we'll have winners and losers straight ahead.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
And just a reminder to everyone, tomorrow the Georgia Gang is going prime time Monday at 8 p.m. We are so excited. To the gang, I hope, because we have an hour, I won't have to cut you off so much. So, Phil, I want to start with you for winners and losers in this block, because of you're a winner with that Christmas tie.
Well, thank you, Lori. In the spirit of the season here, I do have to make the loser what Mayor Bottoms is trying to do when it comes to crime, rising crime. I don't know how Theron can explain this one. She wants to close the city jail, and the Fulton jail is already full, and our crime, murders, shootings are up. I don't care if he likes the police chief or not, but this is a big loser. Keep the city jail open and use it. The taxpayers are paying for it. But secondly, there was some good news over near Waynesboro and Augusta at Plant Vogel the other day. The nuclear fuel shipment has just come through for one of its units, and it's on schedule, and this is a great thing to get clean, safe energy.
That's big news. Kathy, over to you.
I want to give condolences to the family of Dr. Jane Smith of Spelman, and to the entire Spelman family. She's been really a rock in the women's leadership program there, and somebody who's contributed so much to the city of Atlanta. We're going to miss her, and just thank her for her contributions. And Jennifer Dorian, who has just been appointed CEO at WABE, is the new CEO. So I'm happy about that. And I'm just going to make my losers those who say say that the Democrats will pack the court. Mitch McConnell's done a great job of packing the Supreme Court and all the courts on down, so court packing is a Republican phenomenon.
Janelle, over to you.
Okay, well, congratulations to Mayor Vince Williams of Union City. He was voted in unanimously as the first vice president of the National League of Cities, making him he's pretty much going to ascend to the presidency come next year. He's the 5th person from Georgia to do it. And when I spoke with him, he stressed how important it was that it's not just a win for him, but a win for all Southside cities. And I want to encourage people to early vote. Please go early vote before the holidays.
All right, Theron, we have about 50 seconds.
All right, I want to offer my condolences to Derek Bottoms and Merritt Bottoms. Derek lost his mother, Celestine Bray Bottoms. He was a retired educator from APS, a Spelman alum, and was very involved in the Atlanta student movement. So I want to offer my condolences to the Bottoms family. And also want to make a winner, Rita Scott, who's retired Communications Workers of America employee. She's a great person. She's now the new chair of MARTA. And then lastly, I want to give a shout out to novelist and philanthropist Mackenzie Scott, who gave $15 million to Clark Atlanta University. So thank her for that gift.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And thank you for watching. We will see you again tomorrow night at 8 p.m. for our primetime Georgia Gang special. We'll see you then.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.